The Carolina Panthers select Bryce Young with the number one overall pick in the 2023 NFL draft. And I don't think that's a surprise to anybody. We all saw this coming in the pre-draft process. But here's my instant reaction to this pick. Bryce Young is the best pure passer in this draft. Bryce Young has the best pocket awareness in this draft, and I believe is the most accurate quarterback in this draft as far as ball placement. CJ Stroud is deadly accurate, but he doesn't place the ball in a spot as well as Bryce Young in the sense that he placing the ball away from the corner to where the receiver can get to and where the receiver can get yak off of the route. Because a lot of times we talk about yak yards after catch, and we talk about how great receivers have great yak. Well, typically these receivers are working with great and accurate quarterbacks because they place the ball in the right spot to where their momentum and they can continue running after the catch. And Bryce Young does all of those things. The only reason I think why there was ever a doubt of Bryce Young's pick is the physical measurables being 5'10". And he measured in at 204 in the NFL Combine. He isn't. He will not play at 204 because when he measured in at his pro day to work out, he was 190. He measured in the Combine at 204 but didn't play, didn't perform, didn't do any drills. So he'll probably have to play around 190 at 5'10", which will be the smallest quarterback in the NFL. And I think this is an age-old question of physical talent versus physical skills, because there's not a quarterback talent I think that like we've seen as like Anthony Richardson, as far as arm strength and mobility, and all of the God-given gifts. And you can say that accuracy can be taught, ball placement can be taught, reading defenses can be taught, and pocket awareness can be taught. All of the things that Bryce Young is great at, you can say can be taught, whereas height and arm strength cannot be. And while that is true, whether or not something can be taught is different than whether or not something can be learned by the prospect. We've seen many quarterbacks be unable to develop those skills for whatever reasons. And I think Bryce Young already has those skills. I think this is a obvious pick. Just pick the best player. And I think Bryce Young is the best player with the best intangibles from the quarterback position in this draft. Okay, so the Houston Texans select CJ Stroud number 2 overall and trade up to number 3 to select Will Anderson. So I think throughout the pre-draft process, we all heard that the Houston Texans may be taking a defensive player at 2. Well, it turns out they get the quarterback and the defensive player they want, just at a steep cost. Let's first talk about the second pick, CJ Stroud. I mentioned in my earlier analysis of the Bryce Young selection that Bryce Young has the best ball placement in the draft as far as placing the ball away from the corner to where the receiver can catch it and get yards after the catch. Well, I also said that CJ Stroud is the most accurate as far as throw to one spot, throw a prototypical slant, throw a prototypical fade, throw a post. He's the most accurate in these traditional routes of placing the ball. And the biggest problems with CJ Stroud were the C2 test, which, to be honest with you, I am not sold on, only because it's a rather new test, and we'd have to see whether or not there is a correlation between quarterback success and those test scores. Apart from that, from a film standpoint, the only problem leading up to the Georgia game was his seemingly immobile play style. He would get the ball at the snap and stand where he's got the snap, or take a 5-step drop and stand there. And that led to many problems, mainly in the 2 Michigan losses, both last year and this year. In the Georgia game, CJ Stroud showed much more mobility, although the lack of pocket presence and movement was the same. And what I mean by that is he was still standing stationary in the pocket. And then when he chose to move and throw on the run, he showed that he could. But there still wasn't maneuvering in the pocket to get away from pressure, to get a better throwing lane, to attack the line of scrimmage from within the pocket, force middle linebackers up so you can throw a route over. These are things that Bryce Young are great at, that CJ Stroud needs to improve at. That said, if these improvements can be made, CJ Stroud can be a great quarterback. The second thing is obviously this going to the NFL level, he'll have to run a more pro-style offense, where the Ohio State offense under Ryan Day simply is not. That is an offense based on the deep route. you read that offense from deep to short. And that worked for Ohio State because of their great wide receivers and their great offensive line, where the wide receiver talent was so much greater than opposing corner talent. The offensive line was so much better than opposing defensive lines. In the NFL, that will not be the case. So whether or not he can adjust to this new NFL system and can progress as far as moving in the pocket remains to be seen. But if he can, CJ Stroud, I believe, will be a great quarterback. And at number 3, the Houston Texans made a shocking move to move all the way up from 12 to select Will Anderson. And I have here per Ian Rappaport that they gave up the 12th pick, the 33 pick, next year's first, and next year's third. So quite a haul to get Will Anderson. 2 firsts, a second, and a third. Whilst that is typically the type of draft haul you give up to get a quarterback, in this scenario you can sort of view it as such. Because if you said this is the exact same as taking Will Anderson second and then trading up with this to get CJ Stroud third. There's not a big difference. In fact, they had to pick CJ Stroud likely second because if CJ Stroud was still on the board at 3, Arizona's price for that pick would go up because maybe the Colts would have wanted to move up or somebody else would have wanted to move up for CJ Stroud. So they essentially paid close to quarterback price for the defensive lineman they really wanted. And the modern NFL is so pass heavy that it's get a quarterback, block for the quarterback, and then get someone to get after the quarterback. And if they believe that Will Anderson is that guy, then this is a great trade. Personally, my perspective on Will Anderson is that he wasn't as dominant as many top defensive line draft picks over the years, as far as Chase Young, Myles Garrett. But he was just as productive, and those are not the same thing. He didn't have the physical, he wasn't as physical specimen as Myles Garrett to dominate, to show up on every single snap. But when you watch the game overall, he seemed to always be applying pressure. He seemed to be in the right place, and he seemed to get the big sacks when he needed to get them. So he was still very productive. And under a player coach like DeMeco Ryans, we have to remember DeMeco Ryans was at one point an all-pro linebacker in this league. I believe he will develop and be a great Pro Bowl pass rusher for this Houston Texans. The Colts select Anthony Richardson with the number 4 pick in the 2023 NFL Draft. And I believe this is the ultimate gamble as far as a prospect is concerned in this draft. From the Colts side, we all knew they were going to draft a quarterback after many of the Band-Aid solutions the past couple of years, from Phillip Rivers to Carson Wentz to Matt Ryan, all did not get the Colts to where they want to go. And a young win now roster that was what they were 4 years ago is now a peaking roster that really needs to win. And I think at this point the Colts go with a young quarterback, which I completely understand the logic behind, but Anthony Richardson is the ultimate project. He is the most mobile quarterback, the most athletically gifted quarterback, and has the strongest arm. Those are all the things you cannot teach. However, as far as the things you can teach are concerned, he is very inconsistent from an accuracy standpoint. He doesn't move within the pocket very well, doesn't have a very great feel for the pocket after only one real year of being a starter, and can make errant throws and doesn't use his eyes very well to throw off defenders, leading to many of his interceptions in college. That said, he did play in a Florida system under Billy Napier that wasn't a very quarterback friendly. It was essentially the same concepts with the corner or a post route and then a drag underneath, and just Anthony Richardson make the throws was essentially what the offense was. And I think that really stunted the growth of Anthony Richardson. And under a Colts team led by Shane Steichen, the former offensive coordinator of the Eagles, who developed Jalen Hurts into the quarterback we all saw last year and who played great in the Super Bowl. If he can develop Anthony Richardson under the same timeline as Jalen Hurts, in year 2, year 3, being that guy, then I believe that this Colts team is very well off, and that the Anthony Richardson-Bryce Young rivalry in the same division will all of a sudden be very interesting. The Seattle Seahawks select cornerback Devon Witherspoon out of Indiana with the number 5 overall pick in the 2023 NFL Draft. And this pick I actually find very interesting because pre-draft we heard Pete Carroll say they don't expect to be picking this high again and that they were going to make a statement pick. Well, picking Devon Witherspoon is certainly a statement at number 5. And just so you don't get me wrong, I'm not saying Devon Witherspoon isn't a good corner. I believe he's the best cornerback prospect in this draft. He's great as a coverage guy. He's great in man, great in zone, and perhaps most of all, he's a very willing tackler and a very good tackler. And in a Seahawks system that is primarily zone based, that is very important. Why I think this pick is very interesting is because there were a plethora of good corners in this draft between Devon Witherspoon, Christian Gonzalez, Joey Porter Jr. There were so many good players that I felt like if you wanted to pick a corner, you could have moved out of the 5 spot. I think moving out of the top 10 might have still net you a corner. And I understand that maybe the Seahawks had Devon Witherspoon rated much higher than all the other corners. Maybe because of his ability to tackle that they value so much. And if that is the case, then the pick somewhat makes more sense. But I just think that in a case where most other teams would have many of these cornerbacks rated the same, moving out of the top 5, maybe into around the 10 spot, getting more draft capital, and then still picking Devon Witherspoon would have been an option. So if I were the Seahawks in the situation and I decided to pick up corner, I would have moved back. But like I said, if Devon Witherspoon's your guy, you take your guy and you move on. You don't want to risk losing your guy if you believe he is much better than the other players at his position or the other players at other positions in the draft that were potentially available or discussed.